Good evening, everyone. My name is Anubhuti Rajpreet. I'm currently pursuing my master's in African Studies from the Department of African Studies, University of Delhi. I completed my undergrad in subjects which were philosophy as well as English literature from Ramjas College, again from the University of Delhi. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to thank the platform of GSTS and my moderators, Manthan, Samriddhi, Shubham, and everyone from the team and panel. Secondly, I'd like to thank my professor, Dr. Manish Karmwar, sir, who has started this initiative and given students like me a platform to talk about things that are really important and also impart ideas that students think are necessary for everyone else to know. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I'd like to begin my presentation. The topic for which today is evil in thought and story, or evil in story and thought, as I've given the title to it. So, why I've chosen this topic is because ever since I was young, stories that reveal the darker sides of humanity have always fascinated me. The concept of evil holds a unique place in both literature and philosophy, and it has a way of capturing our attention, forcing us to confront tough questions about ourselves as well as the society. So, evil isn't just about villains or monsters, it can be subtle and it's often embedded in everyday actions and choices. Through my presentation, what I want to do is basically explore what stories teach us about evil, how philosophy unpacks it, and what these perspectives can reveal about human nature. Ultimately, I'm curious about what makes people do things they and we might regret later, and what this says about the human condition. Objectives of my study in this presentation, I aim to achieve two primary goals. First, I want to analyze iconic portrayals of literature and the concept of evil in that literature. Characters and events from stories often give us a clearer view of evil's forms and consequences. So, secondly, I'll explore philosophical ideas that try to explain evil at a more deeper and abstract level. By combining these two approaches, what I hope to gain is a better understanding of how evil exists, not only as a concept, but as a real, impactful force in society. What is evil? In the simplest of terms, evil is an intention or action that causes significant harm, suffering, or moral degradation. It's typically considered the opposite of good, which strives towards compassion, justice, and truth. Evil isn't always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind good intentions and social norms. So, in literature, evil often comes to life through characters or forces that wreak havoc, and whether for power or for revenge, and motivation such as fear. Philosophically, evil can mean more than just malicious intent. It often includes questions about human nature, societal influence, and moral decision making. Coming to the main point, which is evil in literature as well as philosophy. So, in literature, evil is not just about villains, it's something deeper, showing the struggles and choices that people face when moral boundaries are blurred. Classic works like Shakespeare's Macbeth, or even in Hindi epics such as Mahabharata, these both explore evil as something that can be alluring, tragic, and often destructive. What these stories help us with is confronting questions of morality, ambition, and the consequences of our actions. But in philosophy, evil becomes even more complicated. What I have aimed to do through my paper is I have chosen thinkers like Immanuel Kant, who discusses radical evil, which refers to the human tendency to act against moral laws out of self interest. The second philosopher that I've chosen is Hannah Arendt. Her concept is of the banality of evil, which explores how ordinary people, simply following orders of societal expectations, can end up committing heinous acts. This suggests that evil isn't always born out of monstrous intent. Sometimes it's disturbingly ordinary and arises from a lack of reflection or accountability. To see evil in action, let's start with Macbeth. In this tragedy, Macbeth is a nobleman. He encounters a prophecy from three witches who tell him that he is going to become king one day. That's the basic plot line of the story. That's how it begins. Now, consumed by ambition, the nobleman Macbeth, he kills King Duncan to take the throne. By his quest for power, that leads him to commit more atrocities, and he eventually descends into madness and despair. So, from the start, Macbeth's ambition and weakness make him susceptible to the witches' influence. What the witches do is they just make the prophecy. They just tell him that, oh, you're going to become king one day, but they never tell him how he's going to do it. Now, he's driven by that ambition and he's motivated to do bad things. This makes me question, why doesn't the idea of doing it morally or consciously right ways, this does not come to his head. So in Act 1, Scene 5, we have Lady Macbeth, who's Macbeth's wife. She famously asks spirits to strip her of compassion so that she can support Macbeth in his bloody quest. So she asks higher powers to just wipe her off all of her morality so that she can help her husband do bad things. That's the gist of it. Now, what this request tells us is that it shows how evil takes root within, demanding that Lady Macbeth sacrifices her humanity for power. And Macbeth himself, he reflects this transformation when he says, there's also a scene in Act 3 where Macbeth says, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind." Now, I feel this line encapsulates his inner torment, suggesting that evil not only causes external harm, but also corrodes the mind and soul. By the end, Macbeth's isolation and madness are the tragic results of his own moral decay, and that serves as a cautionary tale of how ambition, unchecked by ethics, leads to destruction. The second case study that I've chosen is the Mahabharata. That's an epic in India, in our culture. Like Macbeth, which is a Shakespearean classic, Mahabharata is also one. So here's what's happening. Now, the Pandavas get invited to play a game of dice by their cousin Duryodhan, who's had it out for them since day one. Now, Duryodhan and his uncle Shakuni, they are plotting to win everything the Pandavas own, knowing that Yudhishthir, the eldest brother, he has a serious gambling problem. Now, things go downhill very fast. Yudhishthir completely hooked. He loses everything, his kingdom, his wealth, his brothers, and even himself. And as if that wasn't enough, he finally stakes and loses Draupadi, which is his wife. He gambles her away too, as if she's just another possession. Now, this is a very big turning point in the story. This is where Draupadi is turned into a bargaining chip in a game of power and pride. Once Draupadi is lost, things take a dark turn here. Duryodhan decides it's not enough to just win. He wants to humiliate the Pandavas to the maxed capacity. He has Draupadi dragged into court by his brother Dushasan, who's ordered to disrobe her in front of everyone. So here she is, Draupadi, who's a respected queen, a respected figure, and she's being degraded in front of a room full of people who should protect her. But instead, they just watch silently. Now, this scene hits hard because it's evil on so many levels, as I've pointed it out. Humanity gets crushed here. Draupadi isn't just humiliated, her whole identity and dignity are ripped apart. She's not seen as a queen, a wife, or even as a person. She's just as an object they can toy with. There's abuse of power. Duryodhan is driven by pure ego and revenge. He's so obsessed with beating the Pandavas that he crosses every moral line. He does not care about family, respect, or even human level decency. And it's all just about power, putting his enemies down at any cost. And the shameful silence in court, that's the worst part. That's the worst part, where no one stands up for her. There are big names in the court like Bhishma Pitama, there's Guru, Dronacharya, who usually preach about honor. Even they say silent. And Karn, who's usually seen as a noble character, we call him as Danveer Karn. So we assume that he's a good person. But he also joins in those insults. And this is more than just one person's cruelty. It's a total breakdown of morality from everyone in that room. Their silence, it's just another form of evil. When things look hopeless, Draupadi calls out to Krishna and he comes through with a miracle, making her sari extend endlessly so that Dushasan cannot strip her. It's a bit of divine injustice in the face of all that cruelty, hinting that there's a moral force somewhere that steps in when humanity fails. But even though Krishna saves her from total humiliation, the trauma of the whole scene, that will always stick. It does not erase what Duryodhan has done and his brothers, and it does not make up for the silence of everyone else. But now we see that Draupadi does not just sit back and accept this either. She straight up asks the court that if Yudhishthir lost himself, how could he still bet on me? She's pointing out the obvious, that how messed up and illegal this whole thing is. It's more than just a cry for help. It's her demanding that accountability from the same people who should be upholding justice but are letting her down. Now, Draupadi's challenge of rejecting the whole rotten system that lets things like this happen. What does this scene tell us about it? That this isn't just about one awful moment for Draupadi. It's a whole huge statement on how low a society can sink when power, pride, and ego go unchecked. Evil here isn't only in Duryodhan's actions, but in everyone's refusal to stop him. So the Mahabharata uses this moment to show that evil isn't just about individual bad guys, it is also about the good people who stand by and do nothing. Turning to Hindi literature, we have Munshi Premchand's Godan that explores evil in a different way and not through a villain, but through the structural injustices of society. यहाँ पे बुराई एक खास इंसान में नहीं है बल्कि उस व्यवस्था में है जो गरीब और कमजोर लोगों का शोषण करती है. So the story follows Hori, a poor farmer who has a dream of owning a cow, which for him symbolizes dignity and prosperity. एक गाय ओन करना उसके लिए इज्जत और समृद्धि का प्रतीक है, लेकिन गरीबी और वो सामाजिक शोषण उसके इस सपने को तोड़ कर रख देते हैं. अगर हम सिंपल भाषा में ये समझने की कोशिश करें तो यहाँ पे इविल सिस्टम में नहीं है, ये पर्सोनिफाइड भी नहीं है. प्रेमचंद ये दिखाना चाहते हैं कि बुराई कभी कभी एक इंसान के रूप में नहीं बल्कि सामाजिक व्यवस्था के रूप में होती है जो लोगों को एक केज में बांध के रख देती है. So there are forces of poverty, social hierarchy, and exploitation that destroy lives as effectively as any villain could. What this portrayal does is reminds us that evil often hides in systems, and it is not just in one person. एक पूरे कम्युनिटी को असर करती है ये बुराई और उन्हें अन्याय और कठिनाइयों से भर देती है. The next case study that I've taken is William Golding's Lord of the Flies. This shows us what happens when society's rules are stripped away. So the stories follows a group of boys who are stranded on a deserted island. They initially try to create order but quickly fall into savagery and violence. As they lose their sense of morality, they commit horrific acts. And the most horrifying act that could be is murder, which is what they do. Now, Golding's message here is chilling. Evil is within each person, waiting for an opportunity to surface. In this case, the absence of societal constraints allows their darker instincts to emerge. So, Lord of the Flies suggests that evil isn't just external, it's part of human nature, often suppressed by rules, but ready to surface when restraint fades. As I am a student of African studies, it is only fair that I will also consider examples of evil from African literature and history. From that perspective, we have writers like Nadine Gordimer, who captures in her works on apartheid in South Africa. So, in her books like Berger's Daughter and July's People, Godimer shows us how a system like apartheid does not just hurt people in obvious ways, but also creeps into everyday life, affecting how people see and treat each other. Through her storytelling, she emphasizes that evil does not always show up with a bang, it can be subtle, living in the quiet habits and beliefs of regular people that are stuck in an unfair system. Then there's Franz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. So Fanon digs deep into how colonialism did not just take land and resources, it also messed up with people's minds. Colonized people were made to feel less than, and this caused a lot of anger and inner conflict. Now, what Fanon does is argues that Colonialism planted seeds of self doubt and violence that did not just go away when the colonizers left. His work shows how evil can dig in deep and it becomes part of people's identities, making it tough to heal and move forward. And we have a real example. There's Idi Amin's rule in Uganda in the 1970s, which was brutal. He used fear and violence to control the country, with thousands of people suffering under his command. He was also nicknamed as the Butcher of Uganda. And that's a clear example of how a leader's hunger for power can lead to a whole lot of pain for others. So, through these stories and histories, we can see that evil does not have just one form. It can come from unfair systems, from twisted ideas, or even leaders who put themselves first at any cost. Coming to the second part of my topic, which is philosophical perspectives on evil. First up is Immanuel Kant's idea of radical evil. Kant believed that evil does not happen because people don't know any better. It actually means it's about more people knowingly putting their own wants ahead of doing what's right. For him, radical evil is radical because it goes deep. It has a tendency within human nature itself. It's not always about something someone is doing which is horrifying. Sometimes it is in those small everyday choices where people put their self interest above what they know can be morally right. So think of Macbeth. He knows better, but he puts his ambition first, and that lets him take over his sense of right and wrong. And that's the kind of quiet, self centered evil Immanuel Kant is talking about. We also have Hannah Arendt, who brings up in her concept of banality of evil that she came up with while observing Adolf Eichmann, who was a Nazi officer on trial. So Arendt was struck by how Eichmann didn't seem like a monster. Instead, he was just an average guy following orders, and he was not only questioning what he was doing. Her point is that evil can come from ordinary people like Eichmann who are simply doing their job without thinking about the consequences. It's not always about someone evil at the top. Sometimes it's all those people down the line going along with the system. And a similar vibe shows up in Godan, as I've taken that example. So the villagers in Premchand's story, they just keep on exploiting each other because it's how things are done, even though it leads to suffering. Arendt's theory here reminds us that sometimes evil is just people doing what they are told without stopping to ask if it is actually right. Exploring the concept of evil and its portrayal in stories also raises important questions about society. Now, when literature and philosophy they discuss evil, they often emphasize the real world consequences of unchecked ambition, societal pressures, or a lack of empathy. Now, the commonalities of how social implications of evil can be is through these examples. There's also normalization of harm in a way that these stories reveal us how societies can become accustomed to suffering and injustice. For example, Godan illustrates a society where exploitation and poverty are so ingrained that they're almost accepted as normal. What this normalization does is that it desensitizes people to others' suffering, and that allows evil to become a routine part of their life. Characters like Macbeth show how the pursuit of power often leads to moral corruption, and societies that prioritize power over compassion or justice, they risk creating environments where ethical compromises are made for personal or collective gain, and that leads to a cycle of harm that's affecting others. Hannah Arendt's idea of the banality of evil that is evident in both Macbeth and the Mahabharat's portrayal of Draupadi's humiliation. In both of them, bystanders allow evil acts to occur without intervention, and that suggests that inaction can be as harmful as direct participation. Now, many other narratives, like in The Lord of the Flies, that reveals how cycles of fear and retaliation they perpetuate violence. When societies allow harm to go unchecked or retaliate blindly, they reinforce divisions and they give way to a culture of fear and mistrust, which can lead to generations of conflict and suffering. In stories like Macbeth, evil causes a moral breakdown as well, and that leads to widespread chaos and suffering. When societies tolerate or even endorse unethical behavior, they risk eroding their moral foundations. And that makes it harder for individuals to distinguish between right and wrong. Over time, this moral decay can lead to a loss of integrity and trust within the community. So, through literature and philosophy, we see that evil isn't just an abstract form or a concept or even a villain in a story. It's something that takes root in real life situations through concepts like ambition, systemic injustice, and even our collective silence. Stories and philosophical explorations of evil offer more than just entertainment. What they do is challenge us to recognize our own vulnerabilities and responsibilities we bear to prevent harm from happening. Understanding evil, then, is not only about learning what to avoid, but also about creating societies that uphold compassion, justice, and integrity. In the end, these explorations push us to face the darkness and not to embrace it, but to understand it so that we can build a better world. That's my time. Thank you.